Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Thunderdome or the live stream, where we are going to talk about the 7 ways of knowledge work and what to do about them. I'm Raj Indugula. I'm an agile transformation coach and consultant with Lightspeed. Super thrilled to be here to share some tools and techniques and mental models to think about waste that's all around us in our daily work, and how do we recognize them and what do we do about them. So before we get into the main topic, eliminating waste is a key tenet of lean thinking, and waste reduction is, and we don't need to be rocket scientists to understand this. Waste reduction is often seen as a way to improve our productivity. Now, since agile methods are inspired by lean, we can perhaps use this key concept that was introduced in the Toyota production system and see how it might be applied and catered to knowledge work, specifically software development life cycles and such. So that's the context. The agenda is pretty straightforward. There's 2 distinct chunks to this. It's all about waste recognition. The first part is, yes, there's waste all around us in our daily work. What are some of the common wastes and how might we categorize them to help us sort of think about these in a more disciplined manner? That's that first chunk, recognizing common waste of knowledge work. And the second part of it is related again. How might we find these ways? And we're specifically going to talk about value stream mapping. Most of you have probably heard of the technique called value stream mapping. I'm going to introduce this, but with a very common example, so we can sort of demystify this technique and see that it's pretty lightweight and very powerful in helping us identify bottlenecks, waste within the processes so that we can optimize them. I'm not going to necessarily give you a recipe for how we can mitigate all of these pain points, but hopefully using these 2 techniques, we walk away with at least a couple of tools and techniques in our tool belt so that we can apply these concepts within our own daily work. Okay, so let's start with recognizing waste. But before we do that, I want to set the stage. I could use a couple of terms. We talked about waste, and we talked about knowledge work, and we talked about value delivery. What are these things? What do these things really mean, right? When we talk about knowledge work, essentially what we're talking about is folks like most of us here on this call, right? Applying our knowledge and experience gleaned through formal education or otherwise to solve complex problems, develop new products, services. Yeah, the examples that I'm going to talk about are gleaned from the software development arena, but you could think of it more broadly as knowledge work in general. It doesn't need to be just the software delivery context. When we talk about value, it's anything that our customers are willing to pay us for, right? So quite simply, that's it. And when we talk about waste, is any activity that we can eliminate without impacting the final quality of the product or the value that we are delivering to our customers. That's really the context in which we're going to talk about recognizing waste and finding waste using a value stream map. And as was mentioned earlier, being a live stream, it's being recorded and we can't necessarily answer questions as we go. I would prefer for it to be interactive that way, but for this session, please hold on to your thoughts and questions as we go through the material until the very end, and we'll have time at the end, about 15-20 minutes, to discuss any of the questions that you might have. All right, with this level setting and context. Oh, and by the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that, as I mentioned, the idea of 7 ways was defined in the Toyota production system in the context of manufacturing. But these concepts were then interpreted for software development by Mary and Tom Poppendick in their seminal work on lean software development back in 2003. And it's a shame that there's so many nuggets of great concepts and techniques that are codified in lean software development. Unfortunately, we don't seem to exploit a lot of that knowledge that's already been provided to us. And this is one attempt to sort of surface some of those hidden gems, right? So kudos to Mary and Tom Poppendick for reinterpreting these 7 ways from lean and applying it within the agile landscape. So let's talk a little bit about these 7 ways. The first waste is partially done work, right? As the name implies, it's work that you've started. Maybe in the software arena, it's, you started on a couple of stories, but you didn't complete it, it spills over and so forth. Now, examples is, as I mentioned, code waiting for testing or specifications that are waiting for development and they're just sitting there idle and aging, right? The impact of partially done work is obviously no value to the customer, value as we've defined it in the previous slide. And if requirements and specifications are sitting around for a long time before we do anything about it, or maybe we've done a little bit of it, well, there's relearning and maybe the requirements have changed and so forth. Again, that's waste as well. So just a couple of examples of what partially done work might mean in the software development context anyway. The second form of waste that you might want to think about is unnecessary features, right? We're all quite familiar with the 80-20 rule that the majority of the value that our customers get out of our products and services is encapsulated within 20% of the capabilities that we offer. The rest mostly is unnecessary features, extra baggage, gold plating. But we are creative people. We want to build the greatest and fanciest things, but often these extra features don't really translate into direct customer value. And so what's the impact of that? Well, the cost of building these unnecessary extra features, and more importantly, the opportunity cost, meaning that while we were building these new fancy unnecessary features, perhaps there was another more immediate opportunity that we could have provided, and that's been lost because we're spending time on these extra unnecessary features. So that's an example of a waste. Extra processing, we see this all around us, especially in large organizations. When we talk about extra processing, it's any step in that value delivery process that provides absolutely no direct value to the end product, and eliminating that would not diminish the quality of the product in any manner. Classic examples, needless to say, is unused documentation. It's there because somebody said we need to have this documentation, but perhaps nobody uses it, or maybe the documentation is so stale, it's kind of pointless. That's an example of extra processing. Unnecessary sign-offs, you see that in the federal context a lot, and in highly regulated industries as well. Lots and lots of sign-offs. The intent is good, right? Because we want to make sure there's checks and balances. But often, if you go back and look at it, perhaps there's other ways you can enforce that compliance and rigor that you want without these sort of unnecessary sign-offs as you sort of pass the artifact up and down the sign-off chain, right? Impact, again, delayed value and delight to our customers. Sometimes it's about team morale. I've done the work, but it's just sitting around waiting for some manager to give his or her blessing. So impact to team morale as well, all this extra processing. The fourth waste that Mary and Tom talk about is task switching. And I can't overestimate the importance of this particular form of waste, where we are constantly being bombarded. Our cognitive load as knowledge workers is being stretched to the limit each and every day in this fast, rapidly changing world. We're being asked, especially software development teams, we talk about full stack teams and full stack developers and all of these things. Sounds wonderful, and there's nothing wrong with trying to minimize handoffs, which we'll see later on is another form of waste. But what we might be doing too much of is this constant context switching between one task to another. And so much research has been done on the costs and the negative effects of context switching. So the impact is, starting an example that I see always in my consultant role is, we say we are following agile methods, and let's say you're following Scrum, and you start a sprint, and developers are immediately starting up 10 stories all at the same time, and then sort of slicing and dicing, sort of working on one story once, going to the other one. The problem is there's a cost to context switching. As you move from one task to another, it's not like you can do this seamlessly, and oftentimes it results in that first waste we talked about, partially done work, right? So it's not so much that these wastes, as you think about these, are isolated to one specific bucket. Oftentimes, one kind of form of waste influences and makes and worsens a different form of waste, right? So task switching, partially done work have a certain relationship, And the real answer is trying to minimize the context switching. Again, you probably heard the mantra, stop starting, start finishing. All of these influenced because of these kinds of prevalent wastes in our daily work. Waiting and delays. Speaking of waste, a lot of waiting and delays, especially if you're not in the startup context. Maybe there's less of those waiting and delays. For in medium to large organizations, there's a lot of waiting around, right? The value added time seems to pale in comparison to the time where things are just waiting for either testers to do testing or managers to do some approvals, so on and so forth. Again, the impact is time to market, of course. Again, opportunity costs as well, getting lost as we're just waiting around for those given tasks to get done. The last two forms of waste that Mary and Tom in their work talk about is handoffs and defects. Handoffs, we talk about moving to agile ways of working, trying to minimize the handoffs from, let's say, requirements specialists to developers to testers to operations and so forth. We're trying to collapse them, trying to form these multidimensional, multifaceted, cross-functional teams. And that's an attempt to try to solve this problem, right? Because handoffs inject defects, inject delays, and also things are lost in translation. It's almost like the telephone game. So there's lots of downsides to handoffs. And I know as we move towards agile ways of working and DevOps and all of these newfangled ideas are all about trying to eliminate and minimize those handoffs, because people realize the impact, the negative impact handoffs have. The last category that we want to talk about is defects. Defects obviously impact the quality of the product, and defects don't necessarily mean in the software context about coding defects. It could be defects in the requirements gathering part. Maybe our interpretation of the requirements are wrong. All of that diminishes the quality of the product and the value delivery to our customers, and the impact could be rework, things going back and forth in our value stream, and lack of customer confidence. Lots of things, negative impacts because of defects. And as I mentioned, defects, and I'm not talking about just about coding defects. It could be anything that moves the work back and forth between the different steps of our value stream. So these are the 7 ways of knowledge work. Of course, I gave the examples of software here, but you could think of applying these categories to even non-software work. Typically, I think you'll see that these 7 broad categories can help you categorize the different forms of waste that you may see in your own context, even if it's not of software delivery. So, of course, all of this material is going to be there, made available to you. I know it's kind of a dense slide, but I intentionally wanted to make this a one-pager so that you can use this as a cheat sheet and share with your colleagues, teams, or use it for your personal use. So having talked about these 7 ways, it's just a thinking tool, but a powerful one. How might you use? Well, I'm going to give you 3 different ways in which you could sort of apply this tool or this learning, right? The most obvious one, as an individual who's attending this, the first one, look at this list and look at the work around you and the work that you're doing, and see what are the kinds of things, ways that you encounter in your daily work as an individual. Jot them down. What are the examples from your own context? Before you talk about how you're going to solve them, maybe even categorizing them could be a powerful way to visualize where you think the wastes are occurring all around you for your own daily work. That's one way to apply the learning. The second one is pair up with somebody. Share this list with another colleague on your team and say, hey, where do you think within our team some of these wastes occur? write them down first. Don't worry too much about how you're going to solve them, but write them down, talk about the impact, and then maybe some of the solutions will emerge. Last but not least, I would strongly encourage, I'm sure there's lots of Scrum masters and coaches and facilitators who are attending this session. Use it as a retrospective topic, right? Create this simple template and use it as a retrospective topic. Ask team members to identify one or two ways, explore on finding commonality, explore how these ways can be minimized, and then come up with some actions to eliminate them. Because not all of these, maybe some of these ways can be mitigated but not eliminated, but that's okay, as long as you're taking proactive steps towards recognizing and doing even a little bit to clean up the waste. I think it can go a long way in improving team morale, value delivery to our customer, and just your own sense of being a little bit more purposeful about eliminating the waste that is definitely there all around us. That's the first segment of this conversation today, is to really understand the first part before you talk about mitigating actions is recognizing waste. And the 7 ways of knowledge work, hopefully it could be a simple tool for you to think about ways that are within your own context. So moving on, and if there's any questions around any of this, like I said, jot them down and we'll come back and talk about them at the end of the session. So value stream mapping is yet another technique that perhaps many of us here have heard about this more so than about the 7 ways of knowledge work. But even so, I don't see enough organizations applying value stream mapping as a technique to find waste within our processes. Before we get into what I'm going to want to do is demystify this and provide a very simple way to conduct value stream mapping on any particular process that's within your own context. Again, does not have to be just about software delivery. It could be any process. You can apply this technique to anything. But before we do that, I want to very quickly sort of define the terms. When we say value stream, it's really a set of actions that from somebody has a requirement of your team or yourself to do something of value for them. It's from where that value demand occurs, some need, to when that value demand is fulfilled, where the requirement is satisfied. The interim steps between that demand and the delivery of that demand essentially is a value stream, that workflow, or the individual steps that make up that workflow is a value stream. The value stream map then is a powerful visual tool that lets us identify what those intermediary steps are, identify also, we start to put some numbers around the individual steps, which I'll talk about. It's a way to help us visualize more holistically what the various steps in that value stream are, and it helps us identify inefficiencies in that process and helps expose bottlenecks in that process. That's a value stream map. So the focus of this, the second segment in the session is to understand how do you build a value stream map, and I'm going to do that through a simple example. Okay, as I mentioned, why do we even care to do value stream mapping? It's because we want to understand the flow through a given process. It helps us gain insight into the inefficiencies, the bottlenecks, and we're actually, through some lightweight measurements, I'll say, it also helps us calculate the efficiency of our processes. So lots of good things can come out of this disciplined approach. So what I want to do is talk about the different steps to creating a value stream map. So the 7 steps to creating a value stream map, and I am going to, through a simple everyday example, build a value stream map and demystify this process, okay? So you don't need to necessarily, I'm going to walk through each and every one of these steps through the example. The first 2 steps in building a value stream map is you need to identify what product, service, or process are you trying to better understand. That's step number 1. Identify the product, service, or process to map. So in our example, we're going to say, hey, we are the daily grind, a fancy coffee shop that serves freshly brewed coffee to our customers, right? And this is a fancy coffee shop. We have high-end coffee, and we have servers who are going to make fancy baristas who are going to make us fancy coffees, and sharply dressed servers who are going to sort of serve coffee to us at our table. So this is the daily grind coffee shop. That's the product, quote unquote, that we're trying to do a value stream map of. Once you identify the product or service, which we've done, it's this coffee shop. The second step you ought to do is define starting and the ending points that you're trying to understand better. So defining the scope of the mapping. So in our case, for the daily grind, what we're going to say is, hey, we are not going to concern ourselves as to whether the beans have been sourced from Ethiopia or wherever else. That's not in scope for the value stream map that I want to build. I want to start from the process where we are roasting the beans to when we are serving that freshly brewed cup of coffee to our customer. That's the beginning and the ending step of the value stream map that I'm trying to understand and improve its efficiency. Okay, so that's the next thing you would do. Identify the process, then determine the starting step and the ending step. And in our case, we said not concerned about the sourcing of the beans, right? Okay. Once you've done that part, what you do next is identify what the interim steps and actions are between that starting step and that last step. In our daily grind shop, we said, first step is about the roasting of the beans, okay? And the final step is delivering the cup of coffee to our customer. And in between, perhaps the big steps are grinding of the beans, brewing of the coffee, and then serving of the coffee to our customers. So let's say these are the interim steps. Again, this is a very simple example, but it's enough to illustrate the concept. All right. So the third step was identifying the interim steps between the starting and the final step, and so here we go. We have these 4 steps. Once we've done that, what you do next is identify who are the people, teams, systems involved in each of these steps that we've laid out here. So let's say, I have a big fancy roaster that's there, that's helps me with the roasting of the beans, and maybe there's also a person who is qualified to operate this roaster. Then there's a grinder of sorts to help grind the roasted beans. Then I have a barista who is actually going to brew the coffee, and then the server who's going to serve the cup of coffee to my discerning customers, right? So these are the people and systems at play, right? So that's the next thing you would do, right? Lay out the steps, then start to tag who's involved in each of these steps. Okay. Now, once you've done that, the next step in building a value stream map is starting to add some key bits of information, because in the end, we're trying to understand how efficient is my a value stream map. And right now, what we have is a better understanding of where all the steps are and who's involved, but we don't quite know how efficient our workflow really is. So we need to put some numbers there. You can go as fancy as you want with the math, but what I'm going to do here is introduce the simplest, lightest weight way to add some measures to your steps. Okay, the process time that you see on the deck here is the actual value added time for each of these steps in the process to brew a single cup of coffee, for a single batch, so to speak. You're not necessarily grinding and roasting beans for every cup of coffee for a batch. Let's say, what is the actual time, the value added time for that given step? That's the process time. Process time, again, the actual value added time for a given batch of work to occur for a given step. So let's say roasting of the beans in my roaster, process time is 2 hours on average for a given batch. You just mark that. That's the process time. Grinding of the beans in the grinder for a batch, about 30 minutes. Brewing a cup of coffee, maybe 5 minutes. Of course, I'm making this up. Serving serving the coffee to my customer at the table, another 5 minutes. So these are the actual value added times when something positive is happening at that step. Value is being accrued at that step. That's the first measure that you apply to each step in your value stream map. The next step, measure that you have to add is, I'm going to call it lead time. So this is where people sometimes get confused. What exactly is a lead time? And when you look at process time and lead time, there's various definitions you're going to find. For the purpose of this conversation, the lead time here is, it's the time taken from when the previous step concluded. For example, if roasting beans, the roaster has done its job, the beans have been roasted. The time between that preceding step to the time it takes for the subsequent a step to complete, meaning roasting of the beans is done, it's waiting, the beans are waiting. It's the wait time between when the roasting has been done to when the next step is completed. That means it's the waiting time here plus the process time it took for the subsequent step. That would be the lead time. Okay, so that's it. So for every step, what you do is you've already applied the process time. Now you start to apply the lead time. Because the roasting of the beans was the first step in my value stream map, the lead time is going to be the same as the process time. That's the beginning of the journey, right, so to speak. Now, things get interesting. Maybe I run my roaster. I have a single roaster. It runs the night before I open up my coffee shop at 5 in the morning, right? Which means the roasting of the beans have been done and the beans are sitting around for 8 hours or so. And which means my lead time would be the overnight time of 8 hours plus the process time for my current step, which is the grinding of the beans, so 8.5 hours. That would be my lead time. Now, let's say after I grind my beans, before the barista comes there to start brewing the cups of coffee to my customers, there is a 30-minute a delay there. So which means my lead time for brewing is 35 minutes, the 30 minutes here and 5 minutes. Note that lead time is only measured from the preceding step to the current one, right? You don't add the 8 hours and such, okay? So just a mental note for you. And let's say finally, after the brewing of the coffee to the serving of the coffee to the customer, there's just about a 2-minute delay by, and then so my lead time would be 7 minutes, the 2 minutes plus the 5 minutes. That's the lead time. That's it, right? Like I said, these are the minimum measures that you need to apply to start to get a sense of how my value stream is doing and where the bottlenecks might be, okay? So once you have these numbers, I'm not, like I said this is the simplest step, right? You can talk about error rates and all kinds of other fancy things that you can apply to the value stream for more detailed information, but to help us get started, this is all you really need. So once you have those numbers, we are trying to compute something, call it the activity ratio or the efficiency of our workflow. You simply add up all of the process times, and in this case, it's 160 minutes, and you add up all the lead times, which is 672 minutes. And then you divide this total PT, 160, by the total LT, or the total lead time, and that gives us the activity ratio. And here it says 24%. You may think, wait a minute, I feel like this looks like a pretty efficient workflow, but yet the activity ratio efficiency is only 24%. Where do you think the problems might be? Well, actually, all said and done, for a coffee shop, this is not too bad. Anybody in the chat, you want to chime in? Where could you improve this? Where do you think the biggest bottleneck is? How can I improve my efficiency to get it to, let's say, 50%? What might I do? Anybody? You can type your answers in the chat. Tom Maurer says roasted. There should be an understep, the cooling of the roasted beans. So anybody want to chime in and say, what might we do to make this a little better? Randy says the first 2 steps are the 30 minutes between steps 3 and 4. Yeah, so maybe because I have a single roaster, perhaps I can get a second roaster and run things have 2 instead of 1. So maybe my delay between roasting and the grinding is 4 hours instead of 8 hours. Perhaps that could be one way to improve my efficiency. Between grinding and the brewing, 30 minutes doesn't seem like a big deal. Maybe we can do something there. But what a value stream map does is provide visibility into where the inefficiencies are or where the bottlenecks are, okay? So it can't necessarily solve the problem for you, but as Randy and the others are talking about this, at least it exposes the bottlenecks, and then we're all intelligent, creative people. We can come up with any number of ideas to then subsequently mitigate that problem. So hopefully this simple illustration gives you a sense of how to build a simple value stream map. Here's another example, and I would love for you all to chime in the chat, just like you did with the previous one. Now, here's a little bit more involved value stream map, but if you're all in the software arena, this is a pretty straightforward, prototypical value stream map where, let's say, business or product owners are defining some features, and then it's being built, tested, deployed, and being validated in production, and there's a sign off and such, right? So there's set of pretty prototypical activities that happen between requirement specification and that capability being built and deployed. Now, you could very easily value stream that particular part of the process, or you could also, depending on where the start and end points are, it could be where after the developer has committed the code, you can look at the value stream map till it's deployed. But in this case, it's more end-to-end from requirements all the way to production. And you see the high-level steps, and I've thrown in some process time and lead times. So very quickly, where do you think the biggest bottlenecks or inefficiencies are in just looking at these numbers? The deployment, the deployment staging. Yeah, that's a big one. Anywhere else? Or that's one. That's monumental. The lead time between after the product owner or the PM accepting to when it's deployed to a pre-prod is huge. So there were other thoughts about automating the testing could help us improve things. Absolutely. The other big delay you may see is also here, deployment to prod, right? Looks like we are not too bad with the feature definition coding and unit testing and PO accepting, but then it's just sitting, which means value is not really being accrued by our customer and we're not being profitable perhaps. And maybe there's good reasons why we don't move to staging and prod and such. But again, this is just an example, right? This is where perhaps our biggest opportunities for improvement are. Maybe automated testing and all that sounds great, but the real bottleneck is the fact that we're not deploying early enough to staging for validation and not deploying early enough to production for customer value accrual, right? Again, in this case, the steps to building a value stream map are exactly the same. The activity ratio here is 5%. It's abysmal, right? And I bet if many of us who are working with software development teams and so forth, if we did a value stream map analysis such as this, you'll start to notice that our efficiencies is quite low. And the other advantage to doing something like this is oftentimes I see where we say, hey, ask developers to code more. Perhaps that's a little short-sighted, because unless you do a value stream map, you don't really know where the real inefficiencies are. Asking developers to write more code doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get customer value realization sooner, because as you can see, if the real bottleneck is not deploying enough or manual test verification and such, asking developers to go faster is not going to get you to your destination any faster, right? It helps us identify the true cause of our inefficiencies. So lots of interesting conversations here that I'm seeing here about developers being able to deploy. All of these are great tactics, but again, a value stream map such as this can really help identify the root cause of the inefficiencies. So what you could do with this learning is again, this is a slight modification of it's a DevOps transformation canvas. It's inspired by the Scale Agile framework. I just made some small modifications to it. I love single page canvases, and this is essentially one such canvas that you could use. First and foremost, understand the current state of your given process. Before you talk about all of the fancy newfangled techniques, understand what the current state is by doing a value stream map. Put those measures, understand where the biggest opportunities for improvement are, and then envision your future state, and then what can get us there. Feature toggles, blue-green deployments, canary deployments, all great things, but don't focus on those techniques and strategies before first understanding if that's the root cause of your inefficiencies. So anyway, so that concludes the second part of what I wanted to talk about, a value stream map. Hopefully this lightweight technique resonates with you and you can try to take this back to your own teams and context and apply them. So in closing thoughts, before we open it up for questions, right, waste is all around us. And the waste does not have to be anything big. Even the little things, minimizing some handoffs, maybe eliminating some unnecessary approvals, even little things like that can go a long way in improving our productivity and morale. And continually trying to find and eliminate waste should be an integral part of each one of our daily work, right? A core facet of a knowledge worker's job description, so to speak. And unfortunately, not many organizations really invest the time to more deliberately think about these waste in this manner. And perhaps it's time we resurface and these conversations, these old techniques, nothing new about what we've discussed, but too few organizations leverage them to their fullest capability.